Okay, we're live.
Testing.
You always do it. You would have brought them in. So it's not facing it. You know that already.
What's the drop of choice?
Any Jameson is good.
I always forget to tell the speaker that there is a simple mute button under this if you want to say stuff. I want to speak off. I mean, you don't have to bother with it. It's that sliding switch.
No worries, no worries.
But the pastors hopefully tell people if they have to speak to you about private consultation.
They can take a ticket. Shkert,
All right, the floor is yours. We'll just get everyone seated and,
All right.
it's all very relaxed. Whatever you want to do is introduce the show.
Just meditate.
What you want, man. Oh, everyone's up to something. That's what they hear. So, yeah, you can go till max 10:30, but if you want to finish early, you're welcome to whenever.
Yeah. I like it. Why is it? Because that's when it is
Clean
processed.
out the comments.
Yeah. That's fine. You can't make your point in 2 hours.
I mean, what's his name? Father Ari. He was very good. He could have gone another hour. The cleaners came in at 10:30.
Oh, exactly.
Shut down, so we had to shut it down.
Shkert. Hold on. This is.
Hello, how are you?
Naftali's ready.
You have to turn it back on there.
Yeah, I did. Oh. Excited, don't get excited. No, I want to make sure I'm not a leper. Generally, if it's bread, you become a Matzah as well. Yes. That's it. Not anymore. I just turned it back.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if it was working or not. As long as that's better.
Where's Beryl? Amai.
Straight or with next one? So I need to build on
the boys L'chaim. Can we also just start with L'chaim for Mendel Binyamin? That's his birthday. They should have a Shnas Hatzlacha Begashmis Baruchnis, or Begashmis Baruchnis. Like we'll go for double. L'chaim Mach. Yeah. So there's a vart from the Chayz of Lublin that this is something that is written in his name regarding davening, that ultimately the purpose of davening is to reach Atzilus, and then to reach that point of Atzilus and draw Atzilus into this world. There's a lot. I mean, what that means. I was with a few guys last night and we were bringing, and of course, when we talk about bringing Atzilus into the world, those are just words. Like, unless you've been to Atzilus, which I haven't, and if you have, then instead of treating me like a leper and just giving me all this distance, maybe you should be in front of the mic. But it's an interesting vart coming from the Chayzer. And so I was thinking about this vart. I learned it 5-6 weeks ago. And it was interesting because as I was processing, I thought, okay, that's something that I've got to obviously bring to tonight's Verbrengen. It directly talks about what davening is. Davening is about going into Atzilus, into a state of Achdus Hashem, entering into a state of consciousness which is higher than anything that we can relate to, not because it's not physical. It's because the whole notion of Atzilus is that things are in such a state of unity that there's no discrepancy and there's no distinction and there's no contrast. And that we can come into a mental state where we are not in contrast to Hashem, that there's no we. And that you are feeling that there's no we. You're feeling that you're nothing, which by definition, if you think about those words, feeling that you're nothing, that's impossible. Because as there's a story for early in the Rebbe's life, where the Rebbe comments that if you feel, that's a problem. Because when you feel, that means something is wrong. When you feel unwell, when you feel pain, there's something wrong. If you don't feel, you're probably healthy. So to feel like you're nothing is a complete oxymoron, and yet that oxymoron has to exist within Atzilus. Otherwise, we've got issues with the unity of Atzilus. So I thought, well, that's going to have to be something that we bring into the Verbrengen, just because it's a very powerful voice. It's a bit of a strange place to start a Verbrengen. If that's where I'm warming up, where are we going? But the reason why I was thinking about the Vart was not just for the Vart, but also if we could muck around with a very famous story. There's the story of Rabbi Meir Premishlan. Rabbi Meir Premishlan, there's the famous story where he would go to the mikveh in a lake or a small brook, and in order to get there, he had to leave the village, town, wherever it was. Presumably, he was Premishlan already then, because it's later in his life, and he had to go over this hill. And Reb Meir had people there were a number of, a lot of the early Chassidish characters, the characters of the Chassidish world, the Rabbeim, they had their detractors. This was really in the heat of the time where there was a lot of animosity towards Chassidus. There was a lot of fear about Chassidus. I mean, the animosity towards Chassidus was very much a fear-based thing. The Hisnagdus was als protection of Yiddishkeit, and you've got these people who are learning Kabbalah. They're teaching aspects of Kabbalah. They're popularizing ideas in Kabbalah. And what are we coming off? I mean, if we want to be really current and contemporary, Candace Owens recently made Jacob Frank famous. They were coming just after the Frankist times of a false Mashiach. We're still in the century of a lot of other false Mashiachs. So the Hisnagdus is very serious. And so the desire to undermine a tzaddik or to undermine a Chassidish Rebbe is still very profound at this time. And and people would go out of their way. And so we know that the famous story of there are two Misnagdim that decided that they were going to disprove and demonstrate that Reb Meir Premishlan would not go to the mikveh, he would not break the ice, he was too old, and that there was this mythology that was building around him. They was worried about this mythology because of what had been happening in the previous century, and they wanted to prove it wrong. And so they followed him. And not only did they see that he went to the mikveh, but as they followed him through the ice and through the snow, they slipped, they slid, they broke body parts, they broke their arms or whatever it was. And they couldn't understand. And there are different variations of the story. Some variations they want to ask Mechila, other variations they just want to understand. And we get the famous line where they spoke with Reb Meir. And he said, as mis zugebunden oben, fällt mit nicht unten. That when you're connected above, you don't fall below. It's a famous story. But when bringing it and juxtaposing it with this vart from the Chos of Lublin, it's very, very interesting. What does it mean when I'm connected above? I mean, something that Bechlal we bring about. What does it mean to be connected above? But the Chos of Lublin says that the purpose of tefillah is that we should enter into Atzilus and bring it down. That there's this idea, how do we actually connect ourselves higher up so that we don't fall below? If I were to draw from the Chos of Lublin, it would be that through tefillah is how we connect ourselves above. Because the Chos says that's the purpose of tefillah, to mamish connect ourselves to Atzilus and to bring it down. So I suppose tonight that's going to be the focus of what I have to share, and I'll just probably repeat it in many different ways, and that'll be it, and everyone will have heard something. I'll give everyone something to bash me on, don't worry. The question I suppose that I want to start with is, when we daven, is it about connecting to something above? There are many forms of davening. They're all legitimate. Shulchan Aruch allows us to daven in many, many different ways. It can be a process of bakasha. We're going through things. We get to Shemona Esrei. We have the opportunity. Shulchan Aruch says we should be. There's the famous. Shulchan Aruch says we should be utilizing Shemona Esrei for our bakashas, and Shema Koleinu, and Rafa'enu, and Mavarach Hashanim. All these brachas are available to us, and to speak in your own language. I mean, you go a step further, and Reb Nachman Breslov writes clearly that you should daven in your own language, in your own words. He says you should daven in Yiddish. Like mamish, you got to have this conversation with Hashem, and so there's a form of davening where it's about bakasha. But when we look in Chabad Chassidus, when we look in the Maimorim of the Rabbeim, and we look at the general approaches as written about and as discussed in Sichos amongst the Rabbeim, Tefillah is a lot more than bakasha. It's not to negate that, but Tefillah is about connecting with Hashem, and it's about aligning with our Nefesh Elokis. And it's about bringing our Nefesh HaBahamis into a state of submission. It's about the korban that we bring of the Nefesh HaBahamis. So it is ultimately about connecting to things higher. So that's what I'd like to propose is what we should explore tonight. And I'll put ideas forward. And if you have things that you want to build on or add, by all means, we can interrupt. You don't always have to have a one-way for Brangan. L'chaim. Da 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 da. L'chaim. My grandfather, Mr. Wolf, used to describe to me how different rebbes with different personalities, it was through their personality that they would, that a lot of their teachings would, a lot of their Torah would be presented. And he used to talk about that his Rebbe was known to be very humorous. But the humor, when you listen to the Sipurei Tzadikim, there's humor and it's funny, but actually there's a deeper Torah in the humor. So one of the people in history, one of the Rebbes in history, Naftali Ropshitzer, he was known to be a humorous guy. And once his Talmidim, his Chassidim, asked him why. They noticed as Chassidim with a heightened measure of hiskashus, they asked why the Rebbe would cut his nails on Friday dafka after mikveh. They noticed this, that he had this seder that he'd cut his nails. And there are a few stories like this with Reb Naftali of Ropshitz, where when his Chassidim would ask him questions, sometimes they were serious questions with serious answers, sometimes they weren't, but he'd often put them to task. He said, if you want to know the way of the tzaddikim, I can't just tell you. You've gone to mikveh. No, you've got to prepare. You've got to fast. You've got to do tikkun chatzos. You've got to prepare. I'm going to give you a serious side here. So they came back a week later after all their different avodah, and they asked, and what's the side of cutting your toenails, your nails after mikveh on Friday? And Rabbi Naftali told them, because after you've gone to the mikveh, your nails are softer. So it was a practical reason. There was nothing more to it. There are other stories attributed to him, whether they actually happened or not, why he would wear thick socks. And he said because they're warmer, but only after a week of tikkun chatzos would they get such answers. So there's this idea that we koch in what the Rebbe does, and we koch in what the Rebbe says, and that's what we koch in. With that also comes an attitude that if the Rebbe doesn't koch in it, it's something we don't need to koch in. And over 4 decades, the Rebbe kocht in many different things, but the Rebbe didn't koch in everything. And sometimes it took a while for the Rebbe to koch into things. We've heard over the years from people who are close with the Rebbe, Maskiris, and other people who in less formal roles but still had a close relationship with the Rebbe, a close working relationship, an intimate working relationship, that many things were suggested to the Rebbe over the years. And not necessarily did the Rebbe take them up, not especially Mivtzoyim. Most of the Mivtzoyim were suggestions. They were not necessarily the Rebbe's creations. They were suggestions that were brought to the Rebbe at different points. And the Rebbe would sometimes test them out. Sometimes the Rebbe would weigh them up. We don't know to what degree, because we don't know. I'm only talking about what was revealed. They were discussed. And the Mivtzoyim were released. The Rebbe would koch in the Mivtzoyim in the appropriate time that the Rebbe felt was the appropriate time for that to happen. And there were things that the Rebbe did koch in eventually, but waited, sometimes a decade. Even things like shlichus, the concept of shlichus was tested in different formats before Chabad al-Shluchim became a thing. I remember hearing about Mitzvah Tefillin was tested out. It wasn't just spur of the moment. The Rebbe had an idea. Here we're going. Deliver it the next Farbrengen. Things were very, very measured, which makes sense. The Rebbe was an extremely, if we look at the Rebbe was an extremely measured person. I mean, that whole Hayom Yom of that a Chassid is a Masuda. Obviously, if the Rebbe is telling us that a Chassid is a Masuda, this is the Rebbe speaking from Hayom Yom. His opted what he's going to put in, which teachings he's going to put in. This is obviously the Rebbe felt this was shaykh to himself, and it's important for the Chassidim. So the Rebbe was always a very measured person, and very measured in everything. But as Chassidim koch, we get excited, we blow hard, we blow hot, it's exciting. And And that was always throughout the years that Chassidim would latch on to what the Rebbe was into, and not just into as inyonim and mitzayim, but also the Rebbe's Torahs, what different themes the Rebbe was covering. But even then, not always, just because the Rebbe was big on something, did it ever take off. One example is meditation. And I don't mean meditation within the Frum community, but the famous period of where the Rebbe spoke about in public and wrote letters that were publicized later on, but also at the time, was in the 70s. There are multiple sichos. I think there are 3 primary sichos which are the go-to, or 3 primary sichos that are the go-to, where the Rebbe talks about meditation. And say what you want, Lubavitch did not understand what the Rebbe was talking about. And because I have my own yeshus, I like to speculate, and I enjoy a bit of speculation because that's where entertainment comes from. And I think most of all, the reason why nothing happened was because people didn't understand what the Rebbe was talking about. So I'll just give you some background. When the Rebbe was talking about meditation in the 70s, what was going on in the world, and what was the Rebbe calling for, and what was done, and why was the Rebbe disappointed? In the 70s, in the 60s already, there was phenomenal change taking place socially on university campuses and within the younger elements of society. Come the 70s, that wind of change, which had political winds of change, and more importantly for this discussion, social winds of change, come the 70s, there's already been 10 years of social revolution, of where the norms of the 50s and the norms of the 40s are being pushed back, and that the teenagers and the students of the 60s are now in their late 20s and late 30s. And they are becoming the young academics, the young professors, the young journalists that are now holding senior roles. So the young journalists in major newspapers, the young professors in establishment universities. And so when we move into the 70s, we're getting this counterculture that is building on the counterculture of the 60s. In that time of the 60s, there is also a migration from India to America of different spiritual leaders from India. They're coming to America, some of them to make $1, an honest dollar, but sell their wisdom. Others are coming more, I don't know, with more altruistic ideal, and some are coming with more nefarious, like it's just about the money. We've also got probably the largest, most influential band, the Beatles, who have spent time now in India. Remember, the Beatles are not around for that long. I mean, they exist till today, but as a band, it's under 10 years. I don't know who here actually can correct me on that, but I'm sure. I know there are some people here that don't hide their Rabbi tells them, no, because he's from England. That's what I'm saying. How long the Beatles were a band for? Anyway, I told you everyone's going to take something home from the Fabrengen. Anyway, it was short, but in that time, they had spent time in India, and these are the things. I mean, so far, I mentioned Naftali Ropshitz, and no one says boo. The Chesed Blin, nothing. The Beatles, hoo-ha. And not even a stone, not even like, hey, talking at a Fabrengen, the Beatles. Anyway.
10 years.
10 years?
1960 to 1970.
Oh, okay. So not bad.
Someone told me.
Shleimus, 10 years. So by this time, the Beatles have spent time in India, and they've also worked the influence of India into their music, and they've spoken about it publicly. So by the time we get to the 70s, the features of India are now flourishing in counterculture, which is spiritual and musical America. And what we have in America, and actually there's a fascinating interview, which it might be somewhere on Chabad.org, it's somewhere online, a fascinating interview with Reb Tzvi Freeman, where he describes his childhood, because his mother was very into, I mean, he himself was into Eastern traditions as a mature young adult, but his mother was very into it. Their home, they hosted a guru who taught in their home, and he can really describe what this spiritual awakening that was taking place. So there are gurus, and there's meditation, and there's music, and there is recreational drugs being used, all within this countercultural yet very spiritual reality, which is very different to the drug use of the 80s and the 90s, which was not spiritual at all. But there is a spiritual awakening. I mean, my parents told us over the years many stories. They lived in Madison, Wisconsin for a very short amount of time, and then they Hofstra University my father was at. And just the vibe of uni students back then was not the same as the rebellion of uni students today or of 2 decades ago or 3 decades ago. So when the Rebbe starts raising topics that are for Brengen, which you think about it, is pretty radical, because who are the Chassidim in the 70s? He's got no shortage of Russians and no shortage of Americans born to Russians. That's who the Chassidim are. And we're early on in the Baal Tshuva movement. Of course, there are Baalei Tshuva from the 60s, but they are a minority, and they definitely keep their heads down in 770. And the Rebbe chooses to talk about in Sichos about gurus, transcendental meditation in particular. That's what the Rebbe names, TM, and meditation. And the Rebbe calls for forms of meditation to be developed, because at this point, all meditation is religious in nature and spiritual in nature. And the Rebbe is calling for the creation of meditation that is neutral. What we might call today the sort of meditation that most psychologists will recommend to someone who's suffering from anxiety. It's been processed in a lab. They've taken breathing techniques and turned it into a method. They've taken meditative practices that have been used elsewhere, and they've just stripped it of all the religiosity and spirituality and just said, yeah, if you sit like this, if you breathe like this, if you just sit patiently without touching your phone or you close your eyes and you just focus on something small, which goes on to become mindfulness meditation, which is based on the meditations of the 70s, which are put through laboratories in the late 70s and the early 80s, and then starting to be prescribed in the 90s and take off in the early 2000s, and is the most practiced meditation in the Western world today, in the military, in business, in everywhere. And this is what's popular today. The Rebbe in the early 70s saying we've got to develop, not for Chassidim, we've got to develop meditation techniques for people who are sick, for people who are struggling with mental illness, so that instead of turning to the gurus and instead of adopting TM and instead of adopting spiritual meditation techniques, that they can have, that Yidden should have meditation techniques that they can use and can fulfill them and deliver what it is that they're looking for. And the Rebbe makes it clear that it's not for everyone. The Rebbe makes it clear it's only for someone who is ill. So he's not talking about we need a mass meditation program for from people. And the Rebbe says most people are healthy. This is for people who are not. And virtually nothing happened. Everyone will go, oh, what are you talking about? Dr. Yaakov Landis, he developed and he was doing the mikveh thing and the Rebbe was backwards and forwards. Yeah, the fact that you can name one person, and some people say, oh, the Hasofas in Sydney, the fact that you can maybe name 2 people, or you might be able to bring 3 more people, highlights that nobody did anything. Because it's like saying, oh, what are you talking about? No one went on shlichus. There was Noor, there was Kunin, he went. If you can name how many shluchim there are, then shlichus didn't work. So in the 70s, the Rebbe's koching in this and then goes silent. And as we see from precedent with the Rebbe, when the Rebbe goes silent, it's one of 2 reasons. Either it's being taken care of, or nothing's happening and there's no point whipping a dead horse. Nobody does anything. The Russian head shluchim, who were able to organize with really an accented English meetings with presidents and menorahs in all sorts of places, could not wrap their heads around, and the Askonim could not wrap their heads around what the Rebbe was wanting, and nothing happened. I speculate I speculate because, if Lubavitch, if we don't have a great headline of how we're actually conquering something, then we create great headlines for how we could have conquered something. Imagine what modern day mindfulness meditation, what modern day meditation would be had we taken on that ball in the 1970s. And when the mental health epidemic comes up in the 2000s and people are looking for something and they don't want something religious, it's very interesting where the world could have been. Look, it's a headline that we missed, but I'm sure in New York they're going to find some way to spin it that it's another one, and we'll share it on WhatsApp and we'll make ourselves feel good how the Rebbe was all over this before everyone else. But the Rebbe gave up, went silent and stopped, and that was it. But why I bring that up is, if it's not shaykh to tonight's Verbrengen, it's not shaykh to my topic, is because I think that the same way in the 70s, people had no idea what the Rebbe was talking about. I can tell you from 18 years of jokes that have come in my direction about meditation, because, Spirit Guide does meditation, we do meditation during davening, that the jokes, which don't bother me, if it bothered me, I wouldn't come back to yeshiva. I enjoy a good laugh as much as the next person, but the nature of the jokes tells me that meditation is still a silly word in Lubavitch. And that meditation still is something that is associated with the East, and it's associated with illness, and it's associated with hippies, and it's associated with the left, and it's associated with Lululemon, and it's woke, and it's everything else that's bad in Lubavitch. Everything that's left-wing is bad in Lubavitch. Right-wingers don't meditate. It's not a part of us. And the fact that people joke about it highlights to me that there is no meditation in Lubavitch. Now, I'm not saying there aren't people here who don't meditate, but for years, I would be asked, and then I got on the bandwagon. So I have a chavrusa with someone. I learn every Thursday with a guy from a guy here in Melbourne, and he always says, "Where is Avodas Hashem in Lubavitch? Like, where is the Rebbe Rashab being lived in an active way by large segments?" He says, even if it's not the majority. Where is it living in large segments? Because he's learned a lot of the Rebbe Rashab's Chassidus. Where is it living in large segments of Lubavitch community, Lubavitch society? He says, where's the minion that does Hisboinenus? Where are the Chassidim that do it? And when we say Hisboinenus, we'll chas v'shalom translate as meditation. We can't use the word meditation because that's a pop thing. But actually, it's a very real question that I'm asking of all of us, including myself. Where is the meditation? And is meditation really something that either belongs to Chassidim Rishonim, not the Chassidim Rishonim of the Gemara, but the Chassidim Rishonim of Chassidus, and something that belongs to the East and belongs to the there, but we don't meditate? And has that association, that meditation, which is an English translation for Hisboinenus. Oh no, Hisboinenus is contemplation. All right, fine. Contemplation. Where's this contemplation? So I want to unpack this. Unpack this a little more. That I said earlier that when the Rebbe kocht in something, the Chassidim koch in something, and you go through the Rebbe's Chassidus, and people here, it's not my first time for bringing. People have heard me speak about that. There's definitely an urgency in the Rebbe's Chassidus. There's a brevity in the Rebbe's Maimorim. The Rebbe doesn't have a lot of hemsheichim, where it's like a lot of Maimorim are one-stop shops. Like they could be hemsheichim, they could cover 100 pages, but the Rebbe does it in somewhere between 6 and 10 oisius. And we know, I'm not saying any chiddush, we know that the Rebbe just expects that we just know everything that he's talking about until he can get to his chiddush. But he just needs to line up the content before he can make the chiddush or the amazing thing, the new way, the way of how the Rebbe wants us to understand it. There's a brevity, but even when the Rebbe calls for avodah, like Avodas HaTfilah, and there's no shortage of Maimorim when the Rebbe talks about Avodas HaTfilah, it's in this very condensed Maimor. And Avodas HaTfilah is something that we describe Elter Chassidim, often Dor Shishi, who migrated into Dor Shvi, Mashpiyim from Dor Shishi, or early Dor Shvi, throw the talus over the head. But in modern Dor Shvi, you hear things like, well, the Rebbe kocht in different things. The Rebbe was into Mashiach, and there's an urgency, and we have to. This is our avodah, as if like it's almost like Hisboinenus is not our avodah, because if it was, the Rebbe would have put a bigger koch in it. The Rebbe would have focused on it more. And there's an element of where if the Rebbe didn't speak about it, it's not shaykh to us. Maybe we should default the other way, which is all of Chassidus is shaykh to us unless the Rebbe made an exception on things. But the whole avodah of Chassidus still applies in Dor Shvi as much as it did in Dor Rishonim, or Dor Chamishi, or Dor Shishi. And I know it wasn't all romantic. We'll get there. I know it wasn't all romantic. I know it's not like, oh yeah, in every day they were all being mizbonen, but that doesn't change the fact that we have a personal avodah. There's a maimah which I want to just focus on for a moment from 1986, 86, yeah, Tovshin Memvov, Magla Bafuma Derova, where the Rebbe talks about that the avodah, and a couple of people have heard me talk about this because for a couple of years I kocht in this maimah, where the Rebbe says that the era of avodas Hashem from a place of Yiras Hashem and Merirus in Yiras Hashem, that's over, which is a radical statement. That's a radical statement. That's the Rebbe closing the door on 6 generations of Avodah, like that's no longer shaykh for us. And the Rebbe references post-Holocaust, we're not capable of it. And it's got an outcome. Our Avodah Hashem is and our tshuva is mitzad avos Hashem. So that's what I'm talking about. If the Rebbe makes an exception, so fine, close the door on that. So I don't need to spend as much time now investigating Avodas Hashem mitzad merirus and Yiras Hashem and that more gloomy form of tshuva. Fine. The Rebbe closed the door on me. Close the door on that. So I will thank you, Rebbe. I now know what you want of me. And thank you for highlighting all the things that you want me to do, particularly in this dor, but not that it negates, because the Rebbe didn't talk about it, because the Rebbe didn't koch in it, that it's not shaykh to us. So I'm just building that Hisboinenus is as much an avodah of today as it was yesteryear. We'll just take a break. Yelling too much, it's never a good sign. Usually it means you're a bit insecure with your message. So l'chaim. I know. Yeah, the Rebbe said. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
You're just getting practical. I'm leaving.
I'm sorry. I'm going to get there. I became a chassid of Reb Shlomo Chaim.
And you should know that I'm going to say now. They put together 2 volumes.
Yeah. Is that? Are you talking about that?
No, not on Shemachai. Now.
Like say something different.
Oh, they put a new sefer.
A few serious stories
Just on
articles with Mashpim, practical instruction. I have one. I can notice.
I want to buy it.
Now before Tisha time, you have a book here going to Tisha?
Yeah.
You should
I'll get him to buy it.
That's what I was saying in Tovshin Mem was 40 years when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America.
Yeah.
And so the front of 770, that night, the Frierdiker Rebbe was sitting in Fabrengen. So amongst them was Jimmy Garari, and there was also Mendy Feldman.
Yeah.
And the two of them had a polite discussion as to what is Hisboinenus. So Jimmy Garari is saying, and he's saying whatever. Mendy Feldman's saying that's what it's like, feel or whatever. I don't know how, what, but somehow this conversation got to the Rebbe.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And a couple of weeks later, at the Fabreon, so the Rebbe brought this up and he used the blush of the pasuk, Nirpim, Achem Nirpim, you're lazy. Okay, now we've got a different avoid, we've got a mitzvah, whatever. Chas v'sholom to negate all the previous things.
Obligations.
With that mitzvah, but he's suffer.
Yeah.
And it's not Listen, we've swapped that. He said, you're lazy. So that's why this is a much easier thing. That's,
I love it. Who's the Rebbe share that?
He said it at the Fabreon.
Oh, the conversation got to the Rebbe and then the Rebbe
At the Fabreon. Yeah. Look it up. I mean, it was tough to them. So a couple of weeks after Tesla was shady.
So I'll look it up.
Story with the meditation. That was people going.
We'll go. L'chaim. When the Alter Rebbe was traveling to Mezrich for the first time, there's the famous fork in the road. Does he go to Vilna or does he go to Mezrich? Vilna, the Alter Rebbe knew how to learn, but Mezrich was tefillah and wanted to learn how to daven. There are different drachim in Olam Chassidus. And Lubavitch is unique. You've got the Russian schools, you've got the Polish schools, and the Galiciana schools, and you've got the Hungarian Chassidim. They're all from the Baal Shem Tov, but they all have different foci. They all got different drachim based on what the various leaders, the various rebbes, what the various rabbeim felt was shaykh to their chassidim. And then you get people who on a broader, what they felt the derech of the Baal Shem Tov was in their day. And it's known that Lubavitch are the Litvaks. The Alter Rebbe was der Litvak, was the Litvische Chassid, the Litvische Talmud of the Maggid, and that Lubavitch Chassidus Bichlal is Litvish, not Litvish like brisk, where everything's a gavra and a cheftza and everything's a pilpul. But Litvish it's a very cerebral avodah. It's a very cerebral avodah. It might explain why Chabad Chassidus is so broadly published, why every Rebbe has so many Sfarim. I mean, any single Lubavitcher Rebbe has almost as many Sfarim as were printed 50 years ago from the whole Polish Welt. Now there's a lot of money and a lot of people have yichus, and Baruch Hashem, they put their money to their yichus. They're printing all sorts of things, amazing publishing houses, Per Mikdoshim, others like that, who are just bringing chassidus that hasn't really been on shelves, available at Gold's. Conditions apply. Mention my name not for a discount, but I get a commission. Yeah, good, done. But the Lubavitch Chassidus is Litvish in that it's a kop Chassidus. You have to work your way through it. The Rabbeim took the risk of writing our Chassidus down, or having their Chassidus written down, and if they could, to be magia what was written and make sure it was published. I mean, this is revolutionary. The idea that a Rebbe would write down Chassidus in his lifetime, have it disseminated, So essentially, Chassidim did not need to travel to their Rebbe to hear Chassidus. You came to the Rebbe for altis kashrus and what you needed on a personal level, and to be in the chutzner of a Rebbe. But the idea that Chassidus was spread, it wasn't about taking over. It wasn't about making Chabad Chassidus a stronger brand. It was because the avodah of Chabad Chassidus is an avodah which requires an intellectual process of learning and processing, which is not the same in other drachim. Of course, there's limud Torah. Limud Torah, you go l'mashal ger, pshischa. Of course, there's limud Torah, Gemara, etc. But the idea of limud Chassidus and dafka the Chassidus of your Rebbe and your dor and then the previous dors, to really learn it and to internalize it and to use that to guide you and to form you and to morph you, that's something else. That's quite unique. But in some ways, and I'm speaking from personal experience, having gone to Lubavitch Yeshivas for 5 years after school, it became, by default, intentionally, unintentionally, I'd say it's mostly unintentionally, it's just how things are. This is how society works. But Chassidus essentially became a subject, not texts of Avodah. Sure, their content is Avodah, and they make for topics for Verbrengen. But we'd learn Chassidus in the morning, then we'd go to the mikveh, and then we'd daven. And the mikveh was this important barrier between limud Chassidus and then tefillah. So I just want to point out there are two chalokim which we were just talking about during the nigun, with two chalokim of Sfarim from Rabbi Menachem Kesselman from his Talmidim. Rabbi Cohen is mentioned in there a few times under the initials Beis Gimel. And in there are a number of things that Rabbi Menachem Kesselman, Mashpin Kfar Chabad, he taught his Talmidim. Amongst one is Chassidus, is Hisboinenus, and how to be Mizbeinen. There's probably 50, 60 pages on how to be Mizbeinen. And we're not talking about Hisboinenus in Tefillah, we're just talking about Hisboinenus Bichlal, as well as in Tefillah, but let's just start with Bichlal. And Rabbi Menachem taught about the importance of chazering a maimer multiple times until you can learn you can chazer the whole maimer in your head, question, answer, point after point. But then you got to be able to chazer it to the point that you actually can sum it up in a few points. Not that you've got a summary, but in each point you've got all the other points that are built in there. And then you keep chazering it to the point, of course this is not in one day, over time, that you can hold the whole maimer in your mind. The point of the maimer you can hold in your mind. Rachmi and I were talking about this last night, to the point that it's a hergish. Because when it's a hergish, and if we use, and I said this last night, I'm sorry I'm repeating myself, that in the modern day era where the word trauma or trigger is such, these are very big words. What's the idea of a trigger? Is that something can be said or something can be experienced momentarily, and in that moment, a whole world opened up. A whole wound is opened up, and years of memories and pain and all sorts of things come flooding in, and in a matter of 2 or 3 seconds, this person is experiencing a whole different reality. Unfortunately, Israel as a country is now has a generation of kids and young adults and mature adults and older people who will have PTSD. And what that means is that when they hear an air raid siren, it will open up a whole lot of things. When certain people hear bullets, the sound of a bullet will open up a whole lot of pain and experience that could actually knock them out for weeks on end emotionally. That's the negative. What Rabbi Menachem was teaching his Talmidim is you've got to be able to chazer a maimer to a point that you can hold the inyan of Chassidus in your mind to the point that it's like a hergish, that you just know the whole thing. That when you conjure it up, you've got the whole thing, and it's all all-consuming in that moment. But how do we learn Chassidus? We learn Chassidus. We learn a Maimer. Yeah, you can learn a whole Maimer before davening. Yeah, 45 minutes with a coffee and a piece of cake. And done. Now I can daven. That's not, in my humble opinion, and it's not my opinion, but it's an opinion that I choose to share. That's not what the point of Chassidus before davening is. That's limit Torah. You can learn a black Gemara before davening. So for a short while, I went to Rabbi Menachem Krasiansky's Daf Yomi Shir like 10 years ago. It's not that exciting. I stopped after like 2 months. It's a good shir. It's just the wrong time of the day. But if you go to Rabbi Menachem's Daf Yomi Shir, then it's not likely you're also going to fit a Maimer Chassidus in before davening. And the mornings that I went to the Daf Yomi Shir, my davening was unbelievable. You learn any Torah before davening. I've tested this a few weeks ago. I had to work through something, and just how my day was structured. I was learning Rabbeinu B'chai before davening on Al Torah, and davening was unbelievable. You learn any Torah before davening, I'm telling you, your davening is going to be unbelievable. So of course, if you're going to learn Torah's Chassidus, your davening is going to be better. But the whole Hisboinenus is not to learn a Maimer that you've never learned. It's a Maimer, because that's what we do in yeshivas. We'd be working through a Maimer, and that's what we did in the morning, as opposed to chazering the same Maimer and going deeper into the same Maimer, going into something that is familiar so it becomes transformational as opposed to intellectual. Yes, Lubavitch is Litvish in that it is a cerebral, it is a cognitive chassidus. But it's not just about the intellectual process of learning, which would be where the Litvish end. It's the intellectual process for emotional and impulsive transformation, and that requires thinking, not learning. Thinking. Being Hisboinen is not to learn. Hisboinen is now you've finished learning. Hisboinenus begins. You're going through the process of the word gives away. It's bina. It's not chachma. When you learn a new maimer, you're learning chachma. You're not learning bina. You're learning someone else's bina, but it's your chachma. It's the Rebbe's. It's the Rebbe's bina. The Rebbe knows what he's talking about, and he's gonna use havana to break it apart. But for me, it's chachma. I don't know what it is. It's just washing over me. And Hisboinenus is to really shred it and tear it apart until you can look at it forwards, backwards, up, down. You can rotate it in your mind. There's a Eastern method of meditation where you hold something in your mind to the point that you can rotate it and you can see it from all angles. Imagine you did that with a maimer. You could look at it from the end, the forward, and I don't mean Seder, like the concepts. So years ago, before davening, when I was a bacher and young married, I had issues and questions about munah, and I didn't like that those things came up. Not like sophisticated, like nothing exciting, like not like he might fry out, like just normal bachrim stuff, like I don't know. And so what I would do is I'd chazar Jewish history, all of Jewish history in my mind before I davened. It took me maybe 5 minutes. I'd go from Har Sinai to the present day, or the present day back to Har Sinai, and I'd just, like in the introduction to Rambam, you get the full Seder of who received the Torah from who and who from who. So it reminded me, hang on, I wasn't at Har Sinai because I'm born in 1980s. But I know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone who was at Har Sinai and witnessed it. And that for me was enough until it wasn't. Because at the end of the day, then I had a munah, fine, but I still had to daven, and davening was boring. So much later, I found a new technique, and that is that I would chazar Seder Hishtalshelus. And I'd start from Ein Sof, and I'd go all the way through to Asiya Shabasiya. And when the Sefer from Moshe Miller, Mishnah's Chabad, came out, that was like, for me, it was like an elixir. I remember I got it, it was summer here when it came out, just before summer. It was around November time. I ordered it. It arrived in late December. Late December, our family normally are away, and I got the book, and I remember just sitting on the couch, and I read the whole thing in one day. Not with all the footnotes. It's a 400-page book, but without the footnotes, it's like 150 pages. But it was just amazing because it goes through every segment and every stage of Seder Shtalshelus. Unfortunately, Moshe Miller, I don't think is alive anymore. But it's a great sefer, and Learn It Lili Nishmasa has done a great teva for us all to print it, and with Marmakoimus, unbelievable. And so I'd chazed that before davening, and then I'd chazed that before Shema. And it was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. Because if you are thinking step by step, if you go backwards from Asiyah Shabasiyah all the way into Atzmos, of course what you're thinking is not correct, but it's not incorrect. If you do that, I'm telling you, when you start saying words like Hashem Echad, you've got something to think about. And it's not just, I wonder what I'm going to think about today. Like, you don't need to work out what you're thinking about. Your brain is thinking for you. So this idea of holding something in your head and rotating it forwards and backwards, not intellectually forwards and backwards, but whichever Seder you need to think about it in order for it to consume you and for you to consume it. And this was a very, very powerful process. It really made davening something else. This idea of Achdus Hashem. You know, when you think about Achdus Hashem, and when we talk about Hashem as one, and the oneness of Hashem, and you think about Yichudi Allah, and you think about Yichud HaTatar, not as like, yes, the Rebbe Hashabbat, Tzemach Tzedek, and the diuk of the Rebbe, and then you get, and Rabbi Yoel has a whole different take on it. That's not what Hisboinenus is. That's pilpul. You might as well save that for Seder Nigla. We're not talking about pilpul, we're talking about Hisboinenus, to be able to own the concept and not chow through Chelik Beis, Sefer Maimorim, and I've worked through this, I'm working through that, I'm learning this, and making siyumim. Imagine you made a siyum on the same Maimer 101 times, hafachba, that we learned the same Maimer 101 times. Now, Va'atat Tzav is a bit like that, and it can become quite cliche. So it's not about just learning it 100 times from the Sefer, but it's actually about processing it until eventually you're soaking yourself into each concept that comes up. It becomes you. It becomes you. When you learn the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus, so there's a particularly. I'm not talking about let's branch out into Sfarim that we've never opened. The Sfarim I haven't opened. I'm not like here to bring like, obviously Menachem Wolf's worked through Sefer Maimorim with the Alter Rebbe. No, I haven't. I have at home the Inyonim, and I've got Torah Likutei Torah. When you work through Torah Likutei Torah, and Moti and I have discussed this, you don't need to do any course on Hisboinenus. The Alter Rebbe, in every Maimer, there's a... it's like this is the joke of a guy... What was it? You said Shir Shirim. A guy gets a Tanakh, and he looks at Shir Shirim, and he's like, Meridik. Someone's taken all the Dibrei HaMaschil of the Maimorim and put them together in a single sefer, right? So one of the things that the Alter Rebbe has done for us is he's taken all the popular lines that come up in davening and has built Maimorim around them. If you go through Likutei Torah and you put a little sticker or you underline every time the Alter Rebbe quotes a line from Tehillim or other parts of davening, often they're from Tehillim, which means the whole Pesukei Dezimra is covered, and then Lakel Baruch is completely covered in Likutei Torah, Adon Niflois, Beirifois, all these things. And then you've got Shema, right? Then you've got Adonai Sfasai Tiftach V'Yagdil. So all these things come up in Likutei Torah. And why I'm singling out Likutei Torah is because the Alter Rebbe takes you on absolute trips. In every Maimer, you're getting full-on Kabbalah exposure, and process the Kabbalah into an Aveda, because that's what Chassidus does, and that's what the Alter Rebbe, it's just unbelievable, because the Alter Rebbe does not put it through the lens of Nigla. The Alter Rebbe does not put it through a series of intellectual questions and answers, nor does he unpack it for you. So you're really getting like this full-on dose of spirituality, which can be quite hard to internalize. But if you work your way through Likutei Torah, your davening will be different. Because every time you're davening, it's like having a Sefer Shir Hashirim. You've got a Dibra Maschil. Or if not a Dibra Maschil, it's Ois Gimel of the Maimer. Often it's like the second and third Ois of the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim in Likutei Torah is where you find all the magic you need to make davening something else. Now, yes, there are interesting letters from the Rebbe about using simple Sidurim and not Sidurim with all sorts of Mefarshim in them. And that davening is not a time to learn. The Baal Shem Tov says, davening is not a time to learn. Davening is a time to listen to the sounds of the words. And the Baal Shem Tov is a whole thing. You should listen to the sound of every sentence, but if you can be more focused, the sound of every word, and if you can be more focused, the sound of every letter, where you enter into every letter, whatever. The Baal Shem Tov is like full on, and the Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe already, saying before how the Rebbe negated certain things. The Alter Rebbe says some pretty radical things in Tanya, which shut the Baal Shem Tov down. It's like, yeah, we're no longer shaykh to that. Like everything the Alter Rebbe says about Machshava Zaros, don't fight the Machshava Zaros. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? Don't fight Machshava Zaros, just let it pass. That's not the derech of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov didn't tell his Talmidim, don't just wait for the Machshava Zaros to pass. The Baal Shem Tov said, go into the Machshava Zaros and be meiler whatever it is that's come up in there. There may be an issue with chesed, there may be an issue with gvura, there may be an issue with this. You go into the Machshava Zaros and you clean it up. And the Alter Rebbe says, no, we're not shaykh to that. You know how radical that is? Can you imagine a mashpia today saying, I know this is, imagine, okay, not a mashpia. Can you imagine that Rabbi Yoel in his lifetime, we're just going to think of someone who is like untouchable. So imagine Rabbi Yoel in his lifetime saying, the Rebbe said this, but it's no longer shaykh. It's no longer shaykh. Can you imagine like the stampede? But that's what the Alter Rebbe did. The Alter Rebbe is two generations after Baal Shem Tov. And it did happen with Rabbi Yoel. Yeah. Someone had to say it. But whatever, not everyone here in this room agrees with that. That's it. He's a polarizing character. Anyway, we're not going there, right? That's not. We're on camera. We don't want to shoot Bambi. Anyway, you said it, not me. But can you imagine when the Alter Rebbe says that the Avodah of the Baal Shem Tov is no longer shaykh to us? That's revolutionary. So, I don't know why I went there. When you learn the Alter Rebbe and you learn the Likutei Torah, because I was saying the Baal Shem Tov says you should every pasuk, and if you can every word, every letter, and the Rebbeim say we can't do that. We're not shaykh to meditating on every letter, let alone every word, even every sentence. And yes, davening is not a time to be learning. You're not meant to open Sfarim and learn during davening. Davening is davening. You don't read a siddur which has all sorts of interesting Pirush HaMilos during davening. You read that before davening. You come to daven prepared. Nevertheless, let's not go for perfection before we've even put on training wheels. Muck around with davening. If during davening is when you're going to learn your Pirush HaMilos, Zolzain, do it then. No one is going to Gehenna because they woke up one morning and said, today I want to start trying Hisboinenus. I haven't learned anything. I'm going to try it in davening. I know this completely goes against Kabbalah Soul and all that. Yeah, whatever. Next February, you get someone to mop up my mess. but like, let's just try it. We can talk about experimenting with davening. A lot of confessions tonight, L'chaim. And again, Rachmi, I'm sorry, we did speak about this last night, but obviously this is where my head was prepared for tonight. One thing I do believe is like, it's important. If I'm going to Fabrang, I've got to come prepared. So I accidentally tested some of the content in conversation. Obviously a boring guy to talk to. One Shabbos, I remember as a bocher, one Shabbos in 770, I was standing under the Weiber Shul, just in the front, and I was post obligation. Yeah. So I could just do as I wanted. And I opened the siddur, and I found myself, I can't remember what got me to do it, but I decided to do it. I davened in an Anglo tone, meaning instead of with the normal tunes that we daven, yeah, that's davening tune, right? That's Chassidish. I davened like I'm having a conversation in English. We don't talk like this. We don't say, "How are you, my friend?" Like anyone that does sing song when they talk, everyone makes fun of them. No, and how are you? We know if someone says, "How are you?" Like that conversation's going nowhere. If they say, "How are you? How are you doing?" No, you're taking an interest. So I davened in that Anglo tone. So imagine Ashrei yesh ve'vesecha, comma, oid yalu chasela, full stop. So we start honoring normal grammar rules when we read Hebrew, right? You get Ashrei yesh ve'vesecha, oid yalu chasela. Ashrei yom shekach aloi, Ashrei yom she'Hashem lekov. Start with it. Tehillah l'David. Tehillah l'David, semicolon. That's what it is. Tehillah David. This is a Tehillah by David. Ari Mimcha, there's a prefix there of an aleph, which means I am about to do this. I am going to exalt. If I'm about to exalt, which is posh for I'm about to really praise someone, I'm not going to sing it. I'm not a poet. I'm not on stage. I'm sitting under the Weibishul in 770. I'm not going to sing. I'm going to talk to Hashem. And if there's a prefix of I'm going to talk. And I'm going to bless. I'm going to bless. Say it in Hebrew. Gadol Hashem. These are statements. These are bewildering statements. Yosem v'almona yoded. Just stop there. 3 words. Yosem. These. Do you know? Forget the meaning of the words. I mean, the meaning is incredible. Every time you see a Yosem and you see an almona and you see that they're functioning in life, that's a miracle. That's what those words say. It's a miracle. If you know a Yosem or an almana, you know a widow or an orphan, they should not be able to get out of bed. Their depression should be so great that they cannot function. We see widows and orphans functioning unbelievably. You're looking at a miracle right there. That's Hashem's koiches carrying them. That's what those words mean. Forget the meaning. Just say it in English. No. Yosem v'almana. What does that mean? One Pesach, I was eating at my dear uncle's house. He was not the subject of what I'm about to say, because he's a more grounded man. But there was a guest there, and the guest was he's a Baal Tefillah, not in Australia. So I'm you're not going to know. You're not going to work it out. It's Baal Tefillah. Dovi, don't think about it, please. Just. And I don't want to say who else shouldn't think about it because I don't want to give anything away. It's Baal Tefillah. And he was explaining to me how he kochs in being a Baal Tefillah, in the nigun and he was saying how in yeshiva the Baal Tefillah in Musaf they do it like this and really the knetch is on that. I'm like, this guy should not be a shliach tzibur. I didn't say that out loud. I was like, you're right. But I was thinking like, what do we say in Musaf on Shalosh Regalim? Avinu Malkeinu in Musaf. What do we say? That because of our averos and because of our avonus, we're not in Yerushalayim bringing korbanos. It's almost reason to cry. I know we're not supposed to cry in Yom Tov, but yet they built into Musaf this terrible, sad statement that. I haven't heard Eicha coming out of any Baal Tefillah in Lubavitch. It's Avinu Malkeinu. They might cry because Avinu Malkeinu, like, not cry literally, but like a Chazanisha cry. It's a Chazanisha piece. But say it in English. Our Father, our King. Because of our sins, we're sitting here in Yeshiva Shul, reading Hebrew, instead of being makriv korbanos. You're going to sing that? Are you going to recite that? You're going to say that to yourself? So I found myself in the front of 770 and I discovered that davening has this whole other experience when you do it with an Anglo tune. Now, I'm sure that the Bali Tefillah and the original tunes of Tefillah, as Rabbi Telsner pointed out, it's because when people were using those tunes at some original point, those tunes conjured up feelings and associations. But now the association is, oh, that's not how Rabbi Groner did it. Oh, and now kids, that's not how Mulek did it, right? It's as the generations go on. It's not how Reverend Krinsky did it, right? It's not how... We're just cocking in. Is that it? In 770, they do it like this, and they do that. And then now it's like this is how Kaplan does it in 770, right? It's like different generations. As opposed to, who cares what the tune is? Are you listening? I remember. And also the whole davening, where do our hands go? If you daven like this, you're Poshet Misnagid. If you daven like this, you're Habakkuk. If you daven like this, you're Breslev. Where does the Lubavitcher daven? We rested on the stand, or we shackle. We worry where our hands are, how we shackle. If you are saying it in Hebrew English, where I promise you, your hands are going to go up to your chest and you're not going to think about it. Just as when you talk to someone, you say, I'd like to say this. Where do your hands go? They start here and they go out. Just be natural. Allow the words to carry you. We're not even talking Hisboinenus, really. We're not talking Hisboinenus. We're just talking Poshet Pirush HaMilas, not from the Nissan Mendel translation. Real Nissan Mendel translation from your translation, where the words mean something because they are your spoken word. That's where it begins. You want to get deeper, you learn a maimah from the Alter Rebbe, you doggy ear it, you learn it again, you learn it again, you learn it again, and then every time you learn, you realize, oh, this actually means this. You start, Baruch means Hamshacha, Ata means Noichach, Adnai means Creator, Yud, Shleimus, Hey, Yud, Chachma, Hey, Bina, Vav, Midas, Hey, Malchus. You start having all these other associations because of the Alter Rebbe, and you just realize, like, oh my gosh, that's what the word means. Hallelujah, praised is Chachma Bina. Once you've learned Maimorim, then you start seeing the magic of the word, and you really get blown away. But let's just start with Pirush HaMilas, then we get to Chassidish Pirush HaMilas. We're not even up to Hisboinenus. L'chaim. I'll talk a bit more after, and then we're going to done. Because, as I said to Dan Goldrich, if you can't make your point in 2 hours, you don't need more time. L'chaim. So it is a work night, so I want to bring it home. I want to bring a few things that I've said together and cap it off. There is no shortage of content in the Rebbe's Maimorim, Sichos, and definitely letters from the Rebbe about the place of Hisboinenus in Avodas HaChasidim. You want to be a Lubavitcher Chassid, Hisboinenus is a part of it. And I've spoken about Hisboinenus, as Rabbi Shlomo Chaim would teach it in Kfar Chabad. I've spoken about Pirush HaMilos, which is not the same as Hisboinenus, but it's definitely a necessary stepping stone of Hisboinenus before davening, so that you can then utilize the outcomes of Hisboinenus in davening and be Hisboinen in davening at critical points. I just want to talk about experimentation, because experimentation is something that became more and more scary. Bichlal, in the world of Chassidus, there were two industrial revolutions. The Zohar talks about that there's going to be a change, and there'll be overflowing from above, overflowing from below. And if you look in the Zohar, I didn't prepare it for tonight's Farbrengen, so I cannot remember the Maramokkim, but I'm sure someone here has the Maramokkim where the Zohar talks about it. I think it's in Sefer Bereshis, but I'm not sure, which means it's in Chelik Aleph, but I can get it for you after the Farbrengen. Where it talks about that there's going to be an overflow from above, overflow from below, and it corresponds to the date, to the second industrial revolution. It's Noach? Right. Yeah. It's to the year, second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was the beginning of the whole mechanized processes. The second industrial revolution is where countries become mechanized, companies become mechanized, societies move from rural to urban centers. And this is the 1800s. This is when Chassidus blows up. This is Der Shlishi, Der Revi of Chassidus. And for some groups, even Der Chamishi. We're talking about the mid-1800s, early to mid-1800s, 1840. And this corresponds to, in Chassidic history, across the world of Chassidus, you get to 1860 and things change. Bichlal, it's the period where Chassidus went from being white to black. So, we know the picture of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek's wearing white. Wasn't unique to the Tzemach Tzedek. We know that the Mekubalim of Tzfas all wore white, and a lot of the early Rabbeim and the Talmidim of the Maggid, they wore white, especially on Shabbos. White was the color of Kabbalah. And you have people like Shmuel Shmelk of Nikolsburg and others who really bring a certain blackness to Chassidus, to Olam Chassidus, but black as in an austerity, like just a no gashmias. But we also find then very much the systemization of the Chotzer and the Admorim, and where things become more formal. And as Chassidus becomes more formal and more institutionalized, people also start, I'm this and I'm not that. And it starts becoming a koch. Already then, it becomes a koch, not just in the Torah of each individual Rebbe. And I'm not talking about Lubavitch right now. I'm talking about Olam Chassidus. In fact, Lubavitch was probably a bit slow to things because Russia was in a different place. But still, happened in Lubavitch, definitely in the times of Tzemach Tzedek, where there's an institutionalization of Chassidus, and you become a card-carrying member of the movement, which means there are certain hanhogas and certain minhagim and certain drachim, and in Poland and parts of Ukraine and Hungary, early Hungary, there's the way you dress. Lubavitch less so because no one's got clothes, and it wasn't the koch in the same way. But there is that formalization. And with formalization, especially as you start getting later on, as you get closer to 1900s, and then of course after the First World War, you don't experiment. You don't experiment without permission. And there's still a lot of experimentation, but it's not called experimentation. I'm going to unpack this word in a moment. But we have it also today where there's a conservatism and a desire and a need to fit in, and to fit in from an external moving inward. So this is how we look, this is how we dress, this is how we act, this is what we do, this is our Seder. And that's what it means to be a Lubavitcher Bacha today, that's what it means to be a Lubavitcher Balabos. How we wear our talis, how we behave if we're drunk, how we behave if we're sober, where our gartel goes, where the talus goes. There's a whole way of wearing the talus. I'm not talking about the stripes and all that. That's a Kabbalah thing. But like how, I remember when I got my first kapotas, when I got married, 2 kapotas, not 1, 2, because you got to have 2. And I got the pick stitching because that's where the fashion was at for the kapota. That's for for the 18th century Prince Albert that we like to wear. That was the fashion. And there is an externality, but even in the internal, there's a certain lack of comfort to experiment with avodah. But there always was experimentation, but didn't look as experimentation. And what I mean by experimentation is to try to work out how it works for you. How does Chassidus work for you? How does the message of Chassidus work for you? How does Hisboinenus work for you? How does davening work for you? And what are you doing with it? And how are you doing it? We have to be willing to experiment. I'm not talking about with any substances, none of that. I'm talking about experimenting within the Gedorim of Halacha, but to experiment with the content of Chassidus, to break the mold of, I've got to learn this number of Maimorim, I've got to do this. Like, experiment. Experiment with Tefillah. Experiment with Pirsha Milas. Experiment with, how am I going to find this meaning for myself? That's why I told the stories earlier. Because sometimes when you just hear someone else did something and it actually wasn't so also, I'll tell you something else that I did. So when I was going through that period of anglicizing my davening, I don't even know if that's the right word, but I also started adding other English words in. I don't remember who it was, and I'm sure Rabbi tells me you'll correct me. I'm going to say it was the Kloisenberger, just so you can say, for sure not.
No, he would add on.
When he would lane, you say, Tatanu.
He davened to it.
When he davened, it was the Kloisenberger. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Gisadi Ankasa. So when he would daven, there were all these other words, and it wasn't a hefsek in tefillah because it was. It was coming. It was always going to come. But if we are just going to look at him as for him, like you can't copy, but the Klezim, it wasn't a hefsek because it was mamish, it was part of his tefillah. It's like who was it with? Arka get off the table, right? Like once you start becoming self-aware of your shtick, then it's a hefsek. But if this is just naturally coming out and you're not even aware of it, then so one of the things I did, it was particularly in Hisboinenus, because Hisboinenus is very interesting how each paragraph leads to the next paragraph. From Hareini through to through the end of Keteris, there's an interesting flow. Other parts of davening don't really flow. It makes sense, the order, but they don't flow. When you finish one bracha of Birchas Krishma, it makes sense. You move to the next one, but it's not like paragraph break because I need to take a breath. But when you go through the story of the Akedah, if you finish the story of Akedah before you get to then what comes next, Yiratzon. What's the Rebbeinu Shalom? So before Rebbeinu Shalom, if you finish the story of Avram, and then you add the words and therefore. You haven't changed anything, you've changed everything. You've transitioned from the story of the Akedah, and you say, and therefore, Rebbeinu Shalom, because if you were talking to me, that's what you would do. You'd tell me the story, and then you'd say, based on this story, Menachem, I'd like you. Based on this story, Rebbeinu Shalom. And when you finish Rebbeinu Shalom, and then you've got La'olam Yehei and Ribbono Olamim and all that, there are words like so, basically moving on, these words turn it into a conversation with ourselves. I mean, the whole idea of what is tefillah is a conversation that we have with ourselves in front of Hashem, a conversation we have in ourselves in order to awaken ourselves to be able to access different levels, whatever. There's so many ways to look at tefillah because there are so many interpretations of tefillah in Torah. But to experiment, turn it into a conversation. I'm not saying I'm not talking about after Baruch Shama. I don't want to get shot that I was saying something counter to Shulchan Aruch. But just muck around with it. Honestly, muck around with it. Not like I'm doing this with it. There's no need for Kalbach tunes. There's no need to just introduce nigunim unless nigunim really is something that awakens something. There's no need to just do it to nigunim. Just let the meaning of the words speak to you. And let the meaning of the words speak to you and then move on and learn Chassidus and then think about what the Chassidus said about these words that come up in Tefillah so that you know that when every time the letter Yud comes up, it's got some meaning to it. And you are Hisboinenus on this, and before davening, you've got to be prepared. You can't say, okay, I've learned, now I can daven. You've got to have a plan before you daven. You've got to have a plan of what you're going to focus on in davening. You can't focus on everything. There's no Yukazil Lepla in a working class community. You've got to get out. You've got to be at work. Even on Shabbos, you've got to get to someone's house, your house, someone else's house. But you can say, today, I'm going to focus on Lakel Baruch. Today, I'm going to focus on Adonai Sfasei Tiftach. I just keep coming to Adonai Sfasei Tiftach because when you translate those words, my Lord, open my lips, take control of my body. It's a phrase that gets me every day, 3 times a day. Take control so that my body is just in tune with my Nefesh Elokis and it just does what you want. Get me out of my body. You know what you're saying before Shemoneh Esrei? You're basically saying, take me. Take me. These are crazy words. You don't have to be misbeinen. Like, just let the words speak. But I'm talking about, you say, today I'm going to focus on Adonai Sefasei, or I'm going to focus on every time I say Baruch Atah Hashem, Hamshacha, Noichach, Beri Olam. I'm going to focus on Adonai Olam Hashem Malach. I'm going to focus on Karbonos, Hakravas, Nefesh Bahamis. I'm going to focus on Baruch Sha'amar V'Haya Olam. You can't focus on it all, but focus on something. You got to come with a plan. Just as if you're about to daven to Hashem because you really want money or you really need health or you really need justice or whatever, you're going to come with a plan. Today, I'm going to be focusing on Baruch Aleinu or Rafa'inu or V'lam Hashem Al Tzikva. Right? You got to come with a plan. And then once you've got your plan, you got to think about it. That's where the Hisboinenus comes in before Tefillah. And then you can daven. That's just the cruise. And that's what Chassidus talks about. And that's what the Rebbe talks about. Just davening is just davening. Not just you're just davening. Davening is now that you've been mizbeinen, you're ready to daven. You're not learning in davening. Davening is the delivery of the outcome of your Hisboinenus. And if you're going to be mizbeinen during davening, it means you are taking a break. It's like you're going to now take a break. You're going to be mizbeinen, and then you're going to return to davening. And that's going to be the outcome of the Hisboinenus. You want to think Yechudei Allah before Shema? By all means, you stop and you think about Yechudei Allah, and then you allow your Shema not to be your Yechudei Allah, but the expression of the Yechudei Allah. Hisboinenus is hard work. It's not hard. It's not hard. If you got ADHD, it is not hard to be mizbeinen, because Hisboinenus is fascinating. If you have ADHD, you can be mizbeinen for 10 seconds, not on the clock. You don't go, okay, I'm going to do it for 10 seconds. You meditate for as long as you need to meditate. Not as long as you can, as long as you need. So if I say, who are the members of your family? Who are the members of your family? If you're recently adopted, you're going to think about it for 5 minutes. Okay, there's that guy, that's my father, that's my mother, that's my brother, that's my sister. If you've been in the family for a long time, who's your family? You picture them. You want to think about your family and your relationship with each one for 1 minute on each one. You want to think about the family as a whole for 10 seconds. ADHD has nothing to do with it. You just think about it for as long as you need to think about it, so you hold the family in your mind. You've been mizbeinen on your family. Hisboinenus is not a time thing. Hisboinenus is not a depth thing. It's not an intensity. You don't need to sweat. There's no external way to know whether someone is being mizbeinen. They could be staring at the ceiling. They could be under their talus. They could be just sitting with their eyes closed. This is the amazing thing. You just probably have to be seated. Shlomo Chaim does talk about that, and it comes up in letters from the Rebbe. You got to be seated because you're in a state of hisyashvus then. And there's got to be a period of shahir. You've got to just you can't be mizbeinen when you're puffed out because you just ran. You've got to catch your breath. You don't be mizbeinen with a coffee. If you need to have coffee, I don't recommend drinking coffee right before your hisboinenus because you will be more jittery and it's going to be harder to think about even your family. But you get into a state of hisyashvus. And if you have ADHD, do you know what you can do if you have ADHD? You can be mizbeinen. What it takes other people 10 minutes, you can do in 1 minute. Because it's what I said before, it's a point that it's a part of you that you just hold it in your mind. Whether you hold it in your mind for 4 hours, which trust me, you're going to have an absolute trip. Unbelievable. I remember multiple times, and still, if I chaza seder hishtarshlus, it is a trip. No chemicals required. No chemicals required. You start at the bottom and you just keep slowly climbing. It is going to make you disassociate with your surroundings and you will not know how much time passed. It could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour. Just depends how. The only thing that's going to stop you is someone interrupting, is someone going, Ta, when's breakfast? And there's nothing worse than that. There's nothing worse than someone going, because there's nothing worse than being grounded when you're not ready to be grounded. But you know what? That's good. That's good. Let that be the frustrations of life. So experiment. You've got a structure, experiment. Take a moment, work out what you're doing with it. Don't expect a mashpia to tell you what you're going to do with it. You do it. It's not hard. Don't worry about, is this the right way? I want to tell a story and finish with this. It's the famous story of the Baal Shem Tov where he stayed at a krechma, and the innkeeper asked the Baal Shem Tov that in lieu of payment, could he be mesader his siddur for him? Because every day He reads the whole book because there's no binding anymore, and it's just got all these pages. And the Baal Shem Tov says no worries, and he makes a pile for Shachris and a pile for Mincha and a pile for Mariv and Kriyashma and a whole lot of other stuff that you're not going to need to say. And as the Baal Shem Tov leaves, he goes on his way, and the wind blows and all the piles. Like when I tell the story to my kids, like there's such a letdown. Like, Nebach, the wind blows and is back to having a big pile of disorganized. Anyway, whole story. The Baal Shem Tov's way ahead, and the guy's chasing after the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov floats across the river, and this guy floats across the river. I'm not getting into all the miracle stories now. And then the Baal Shem Tov asks him, how'd you do that? He goes, I saw what you did. I copied you, and he performed a miracle. You just keep doing what you're doing, my friend. It's working. Where simple folk are almost encouraged to remain pure in their simpleness, even if it doesn't quite fit into halacha, but that's not for tonight. If we are doing a Shema and we're not breaking halacha, and remember, halacha is our guide. More than anything, halacha. You know, we sometimes, as Chassidic communities, we sometimes forget that halacha, and this is a very loaded statement for another time, that halacha is our be-all and end-all. Halacha is our be-all and end-all. Not hergesh, not minhag, halacha. This is the hadracha of Hashem. Halacha is what Moshe Rabbeinu wants us to do. It's what Hashem wants us to do. It's how we do the Dibur Tachtonim. The minhagim and the hergeshim are the wings for the halacha, but it starts with halacha and it ends with halacha. And if our family and if our friends are keeping halacha, we've got tzaddikim on our hands. Anyway, if we're operating within the realm of halacha, and we're playing with how we want Hisboinenus and Pirush Milus and Avodas HaChassidus, Avodas HaBelev, of actually thinking and harnessing our emotions and our impulses as we started, and we go with the purity of the guy who has to read all the pages, trust me, we're going to have the Baal Shem Tov's brachas and the brachas of our Rabbeim, and that their brachas will elevate us and give us the koyach to keep growing in our Hisboinenus. And may we be zocher that as a result of our Hisboinenus and as a result of our Avodah Shebelev and our process of internalizing Chassidus in this way, we will be megala what the Rebbe talks about in the Tofshin Nun Aleph and Nun Beis Sichos and Nun Beis Befrat, that as a result of this we will discover the nitzutz of Mashiach within us, because the nitzutz of Mashiach is the hiskalus of the Ma'ayonos. There's not going to be hiskalus of Mashiach if there's no desire for the Ma'ayonos that Mashiach is going to bring. And we're not going to discover the nitzutz of Mashiach within us if we're not interested in drinking from the fountains of Mashiach. If we want to reach Achdus and we want to believe that there's Achdus Haber inside everyone and that there's a nitzutz of Mashiach in everyone, then discover it. The nitzutz is in that contemplation. It's in that call it? That's where it is. It's not just on Mitzvayim. It's not just on Tzedakah. It is in the contemplation of Chassidus. That's where we're going to release the spark of Mashiach, leading to the scholars of Mashiach and a true transformation of the world, where we're not just bringing karbonos, but we actually bring karbonos and having the experience of the karbonos, of seeing the Pnei Arya come down, where we will see Elikus in physicality. This is something that is not accessible to someone who's not training to see it. And that's not going to happen without Hisboinenus, l'chaim. How was it, Prophet Hashem? It's unbelievable. You picture the
Yeah, but it's hard
hamshach.
to maintain. It's like to go.
You get faster.
Everyone, this was the 9th of the 10th week. Next week, Mitzvah Shem will be the last week. So if anyone's already been to 7 out of the 9, there will be a raffle for those that enter 7 out of the 10. So if you're already, please come and let me know if you've come and you've been involved. And we'll Mitzvah Shem be doing a ticket to the Rebbe for all those that have come to 7 of the.
Where's the raffle? After next week.
Next week will be Rabbi Safran Nashir about Chayelo. So it'll be next Thursday as well.
So sicher machen.